This is something I didn't mention with my Sweater Quilt 2 quilt pattern, but which is another way I'm going to make one. This is my standard 6-inch potholder loom. Mine's by Noe B. It's a vintage one. And I like the plain frame metal because you have plenty of room to work with bulky fabrics as you're pulling things through. And that's laeom brand fisherman wool, which used to be my favorite wool of all time. This is a scrap piece of fabric left over from making a dress. And look at this. I had 2 of these already done. And these 2 are a little bit uneven. But that's 2 squares done on the potholder loom. And then I used my Singer 237 to stitch them together with a zigzag stitch. You can barely see it. And it was a little bit more obvious before I washed them. But I washed them, and now I am matching up that scrap fabric with this. And this is a very simple way to do the 6x18 format of a sweater quilt by doing 3 of these squares. Now, even though the loom is 6 inches, they come out at about 5. And for some reason, if you don't watch your tension, you can still get them a little bit larger or smaller than each other. But they come out at about 5 inches, and this is 10 inches instead of 12. So they're really 5 by 5. So that would give you 5 by 15. So it's a little bit smaller than the other sweater quilt template, but as you can see, you wouldn't have to decorate that at all. Well, it's a pretty fabric, but if you're a quilter or even a dressmaker and you have leftover fabrics like this, the other example I had shown was denim, and with painting or adding to it, this you would not have to do any of that. You would still trim fabric to match the size of the weaving, in this case, on the back, and then stitch around it and maybe stitch right down in thirds, quilt it together, and then put the whole thing together in sections. And very simple to do, especially with leftover fabrics. Now, I've made a few dresses out of a certain pattern, and you have to buy, I think, 2 yards or maybe 3 yards of fabric, and then I'm left with about 3/4 of a yard. I think I can only get 10 panels total, and they are slightly smaller. So this would be more like a lap quilt or even a wall quilt, but it would make a nice lap quilt. It would make a nice wheelchair quilt, you know, for somebody in a wheelchair. So it's another way to do the idea, the pattern of Sweater Quilt 2, but as a weaver, without having to weave a scarf and then cut it to length. So 3 of these will give you 15 inches, which is almost the same length, a little bit smaller.